Howdy, boys and girls, and welcome back to Championship Week at the Carla and Crappy Show. Boy, that's fun to say, right, Carla?
Woo! We're there. It's exciting.
I was thinking as I got this set up, I was like, I have no idea what number week this is, and it doesn't matter because it's Championship Week in everywhere except for the Big 12, and that's something that we're probably going to discuss it because that's going to turn out to be a fairly important part of what happens this weekend, even if there is no title game. Yes. Carla, what game are you excited about? Is there one?
Wow, that's a great way to start the show. Which game are you most excited about? I'm not sure. Okay. I guess gut instinct right now says a game that's actually not technically a championship game. I'm really excited about watching the Baylor K-State game.
Okay.
Because that game is incredibly significant, and we'll get there. But yeah, that's the one I'm really pretty excited about because that's going to play a huge role.
Mm-hmm. It's sort of half of a title game, and we'll get to that in the other half. I'm naturally the Ohio State game, the Big Ten championship is the one that I'm kind of looking at. But before we get there, let's take a spin through the top 10 as the committee. The committee announced just one night ago. Number 10 is Mississippi State. They have no game. They are done. I mean, I don't mean that in the sense that the kids would say that they don't have a game scheduled this weekend. Number 9, this is the one we mentioned before, and we can kind of jump in with this half of it right now. Kansas State at Baylor. Kansas State may or may not have an opportunity to make the playoff. I would think at number 9 with 1 week left, probably not. Baylor, however, is number 6 in the rankings. They're favored by 8.5 points. Bryce Petty says he's going to be ready to play, but that's iffy enough that there are a number of sites that I look at as we get ready for the show that did not even post lines for this game. Obviously, well, Carla, take us through ramifications. And maybe a little bit about what you see happening here.
Well, that's an interesting point about the lines. I didn't know that. But Baylor did not look good last week, but a lot of that has to do with what you're talking about with Bryce Petty. Bryce Petty suffered concussion-like symptoms in the second half of I think it was the second half, early in the second half of the game last week against Texas Tech. And so Baylor just squeaked by with a 2-point win. A game that very easily could have been tied. Texas Tech had the opportunity to tie that game up on a 2-point conversion. And freshmen will be freshmen. And the Texas Tech quarterback, whose name is escaping me at the moment, held on to the ball in a 2-point conversion and took a sack. You can't do that, right? It does. At that point, it doesn't matter. Throw the ball out the back of the end zone. At least try something. Don't take the sack. But that's neither here nor there.
But good word. That's like you can say that's a moral victory for Texas Tech, which if I remember, it was like a 28-point underdog. Yes. Or is there such a thing as a moral loss? Is that could we pin that on Baylor for last weekend?
Well, and this is where we start splitting hairs, right? And this is where we're still trying to figure out what the committee is saying in regards to injuries, because they played without their quarterback, their star quarterback, for the second half of that game and almost let it slip away. Yet they're still sitting at number 6 in the rankings. Right. Yes, they're behind TCU. We'll get to TCU in a minute, but they're still sitting right there. And so it's going to be interesting to see. I would find it very hard to believe that Petty would not play at least some role in this game. Whether he sees every snap under center, that might be left to be seen. But I think if he's cleared to go, he's going to go. Because Baylor, quite frankly, has to win this game. And they not only have to win this game, they have to win it convincingly. Because of the issue with TCU. Now, they hold the head-to-head, but the fact that the committee has vaulted TCU into the top 4 means that common opponents are going to be huge. And I took a look at some of the common opponents that these two teams have.
Okay.
Baylor clobbered Oklahoma, 48-14. TCU edged them 37. It was a 4-point win, 37-33. So edge in that goes to Baylor. Texas Tech, the exact opposite. TCU clobbered Texas Tech by the tune of 82-27.
Right.
And Baylor gets by with a 2-point win. Then you look at Kansas, and it's the other way again, because TCU laid the egg against Kansas, won by 4 points. Baylor destroyed them. I didn't even have the score written down. It was Baylor destroyed them. So that brings us to Kansas State. And TCU had a convincing win over Kansas State. That game was in prime time. It was on Fox. I remember watching that game and shutting it off in the second quarter because it was that convincing of a win. Okay. I flipped over to I don't even remember. That was the night of the Penn State-Ohio State game. I ended up flipping over to see the Penn State-Ohio State game that night. Because I was intending on actually, even though those are our teams, I was intending on watching the TCU K-State game because I was really intrigued by it. TCU was up by like 4 scores in the second quarter. So they won that game 41-20. You have to believe that with the back and forth between these two teams, if Baylor does not blow out Kansas State or win by more than 3 scores, I don't know if the head-to-head is going to matter. Because if you look at, and the debate is TCU this past week, and we'll talk a little bit more about TCU here in a bit, but TCU destroyed Texas at home on Thanksgiving night. That was probably the most impressive win of the entire weekend. The way they just went out there and dominated that game from start to finish on Texas's home field.
Right.
It's going to be tough to overcome that if you're Baylor.
Okay.
Even with the head-to-head, I think they have to go out and just absolutely dominate Kansas State and then force the committee to have the discussion about the head-to-head.
It's interesting because I don't, and we can talk more later. I've been saying, I've become accustomed to saying that Ohio State needs help. Ohio State needs help. At this point, it looks to me like Baylor is, if you're looking at the teams that have a realistic shot at making the top 4 after this weekend, Baylor is a team that might need the most help. But we can come back to that when we get to the number 3 slot. Number 8 is Michigan State. They also are done for the season. Obviously, the exception of whatever bowl game we get. Arizona playing Oregon for the Pac-12. Pac-15, Pac-37 championship. Oregon is a 14.5-point favorite. This is a neutral site game, of course. Arizona has beaten Oregon once before this season, correct?
Yes.
What happens if Arizona beats Oregon again?
Chaos.
I did not say Oregon is number 2 in the rankings, where that's been a consistent spot for them for a while. Yeah.
That's an interesting debate. Does Arizona have enough muster to get up in? Does Arizona have a strong enough of a schedule and a ranking and a position in the eyes of the committee that if they outright win the Pac-12 title, that it would vault them up into the top 4? I'm not sure.
They would have to jump with 2 losses. They would have to jump at least a couple teams that you assume will have 1 loss.
Yeah, I think Arizona is going to need some help to get into the top 4. They would need a couple of teams to lose, which isn't out of the question. That's the fun part about this weekend. It absolutely could happen. The team that I think is sitting really interestingly right now is Michigan State, of all things. Because if complete chaos happens, it's not out of the question.
Sure.
I think it's really interesting that Michigan State is still in the top 10. But Arizona, yes, they beat Oregon earlier this season. That was Oregon's lone loss. They also beat Oregon last season. They've won 2 in a row against Oregon. Beating a team twice in the same season, really tough to do.
Sure.
Really tough to do. Mariota's playing better than any quarterback should rightfully be playing right now. It's absurd what he's doing right now. Did you see the hurdle the player last week? And come on, right? They're going to come out here with revenge on their minds. And I honestly, even though yes, Arizona has beaten them once earlier this season, I think it's going to be really tough for Arizona to do it twice in the same year. Because Oregon's got revenge on their minds and a chance at a national title on their minds. Not out of the question. Stranger things have happened.
Sure.
But no, I still think this is one that Oregon wins because they're the ones actually kind of playing the underdog card in this game, which is kind of crazy considering all things. But I did find it interesting Arizona backing into the Pac-12 South title.
Yeah.
Because of UCLA just flat out laying an egg against Stanford. And Rich Rod being named Pac-12 Coach of the Year the same day that Brady Hoke gets fired at Michigan.
I might have noticed that also.
Yeah.
That was an interesting bit there. We've already talked about number 6 Baylor and number 9 K-State. That gets us to the game that obviously I'm the most interested in. Ohio State playing number 13 Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game. Wisconsin, the lower-ranked team, is probably right and correctly so a 4-point favorite in this game. I understand you might have questions for me.
I do. Yeah, we're going to reverse roles here because you were actually in attendance at that game on Saturday. And
yes.
I mean, I was watching from the comfort of a hotel room and only kind of half paying attention to the game because unfortunately, it's that time of year I'm grading papers. So I was grading papers and keeping an eye on that game and slightly surprised at how close it was early on. But I guess, and I know that your seats are pretty high in the stadium. But did you all in the stadium have any inkling of how serious Barrett's injury was when it happened?
I don't. It bugs the hell out of me to fiddle around with binoculars and stuff, so I don't see that. And there was not a replay in the stadium of that play. The telling thing was that cart came out very quickly. Aircast came off the cart very, very quickly. So you don't know exactly what it is, but especially when you see aircast, it's like, oh, that's a break somewhere, and it's really not good. And it was and clearly, it was obvious to everyone that this is not kind of thing where we stand around scratching our heads like, well, let's put the aircast on to be careful. The cart was out immediately. The aircast was off the cart immediately. So yeah, you knew something was serious. It did take a little bit away from celebrating, the win of the Michigan game, and because you're left with doubts about, you're left with here we go again. You're left with doubts about what happens next week. Although we all know who the next quarterback is. Then we've seen Cardale Jones play on and off in cleanup stuff throughout the season. And so we'll see how that goes.
I mean, the good thing is that Ohio State scored some points with Cardale Jones under center, and finished and closed out the game. But Michigan is not Wisconsin.
Nope.
Assessing defensively, are you ready for Melvin Gordon? Is anybody possibly ready for Melvin Gordon?
Ohio State's in the position that they've been all season. I think you've seen it against teams with good offenses to an extent. We saw it against Indiana a couple weeks ago. I saw it in person against Penn State. It's a good defense. Front seven are solid to spectacular depending on which guys you're talking about. Ohio State still needs to score. We're not going to win 21-17 games. So that's I'm Gordon's going to get some yards. He's going to get a couple touchdowns. Hopefully, only a couple. and then the question is how much of Ohio State's offense can we realistically expect to see? And what form is that going to take? Cardale had of the three quarterbacks who have handled footballs for Ohio State during this calendar year. Cardale Jones has the biggest arm. There's no question. And do not forget that he was until about halfway through summer camp, he was the backup quarterback. He was the number 2 guy. He can run, obviously, and presents a unique challenge in that he is 6'6" and 250. That's a little bit different than the kind of what you used to see with JT or Braxton. I really think it comes down to if he can throw the ball accurately. That's something that's been Ohio State's. That's where much of the offense, much of the scoring offense has come from. We run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. And when the defense reacts with the heavy presence in the box, JT's been able to hit well-timed slant patterns. Not sure that that's going to be available just because of the timing aspect. Deep balls, however, that's a possibility. And if we can hit them, I will feel pretty good about Saturday night.
Yeah, I think it by far it's the game that suddenly has the most intrigue, and unfortunately it's for that bad reason. I would have been really excited to see this game with Barrett under center. I think it would have been a really interesting battle of two different offenses. And again, do we have to say this every single time? It's indoors. Fix that, Big Ten. Please.
Yes.
So I was excited to see those two teams, and then when you heard how catastrophic Barrett's injury was, it's become more of a mystery as to how this game is going to go. And you have to believe with Ohio State sitting at 5, this is the committee hedging its bet. I think you could have made the argument had Barrett not gotten hurt in the game against Michigan, that Ohio State would have bumped up into the top 4. I think it could have happened. I don't know if it would have, but I think you could have made that argument a lot easier than you can right now.
And I would have.
Yeah. I mean, right now there's too many unknowns. So putting them at 5 is a great spot right now. They're still ahead of Baylor, and if they go out and they beat Wisconsin, then absolutely they should be right there and in the discussion. But right now nobody knows.
Right.
What's that offense going to do with him under center? It's gonna be interesting. It's kind of rooting against two things. You kind of want to see the team that's done well all year have the opportunity, even with the second backup quarterback of the season. Right. At the same time, you love Melvin Gordon trying to go for the all-time rushing record.
Well, I don't, but sure.
You did up until this week. Come on.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I would like, so you're kind of rooting against two things. That's Big Ten football, So it's going to be a good game. I'm excited about it, but yeah, it doesn't quite have the luster. It has more of the mystique.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Let's maybe mystique is not the good word for Florida State. Maybe baffling. Maybe, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But they're probably baffled as well, because all they've done is go undefeated, and they keep getting bumped down in the rankings. They're still in the playoff, and as someone on ESPN pointed out, number 4 is actually not a bad spot for them, because you don't have to go to Pasadena for your first game. You have to go to New Orleans. But Florida State, before they get there, Florida State has to deal with Georgia Tech, a pretty hot Georgia Tech team in the ACC title game, and the Seminoles are only a 4-point favorite in this. What does Florida State have to do to get to get the respect of the voters here?
Win a game earlier than the second half.
It probably is that simple.
I don't get it. Florida's an okay team. They're not a great team. And again, let them hang in, for a good portion of that game on Saturday. And I mean, what was the stat that Winston had more interceptions in the first quarter than Mariota has thrown all year?
Yes.
I mean, it's just like his head just wasn't even in the game. And so and I'm not the only person to say that. There are several commentators that said, like, where was he? He was not in that game. I was shocked. I wasn't home last night when the rankings came out, and I was shocked that they dropped to 4. I expected them to hold steady at 3. But you can't overlook Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is a team that is really hot right now, has this option offense that is just absolutely baffling. Ask Georgia. And they're essentially playing at home.
Yeah.
They're based in Atlanta. I mean, the Georgia Dome is not their home field, but they're playing in front of a home home crowd. Usually in a game like this, Florida State, I mean, they travel well. They're a huge, institution that, their fans travel well. I think it's going to be split 50-50 in this game. I think you're going to see a lot of Georgia Tech people there, even though they're a smaller school because it's in their backyard.
Right.
I really think that Georgia Tech could pull this off, because of the way that Florida State just has been, walking blindfolded through first halves of games and then trying to figure out a way to win them late. Georgia Tech's not going to let them do that, because they didn't against Georgia, and Georgia's a good team. So if there's an upset waiting to happen this weekend, this is the one I've got circled. I think this is the one that's the most likely to happen, and if it does, the ACC is out, and that's good news for your Buckeyes.
That's would have to happen. Because to be honest, I'm not sure I see an upset with the other three games in the top four. It's encouraging, and you have to think if Florida State continues to operate the way they do, one of these weeks is going to bite them. And maybe this is the week. Number 3 TCU versus Iowa State. TCU is a 33.5-point favorite. Let's answer one basic question here vis-a-vis TCU and Baylor. With a win on Saturday over Iowa State, does TCU just end this discussion?
I don't think so. I think it has to be a convincing win.
Okay.
They sleepwalking against Kansas. They can't do that against the bottom feeders of the Big 12. They can't. And I think having done that against Kansas, they can't afford to do it against Iowa State. They need to win the game convincingly.
Okay.
By the line would be great. But if 3 scores, I think.
Okay.
I think they need to just go out there and just pretty much like they did against Texas.
Okay.
Dominate the game from start to finish. If they do that, in my book, door shut. But I also am hedging my bet against Baylor to see what they do. If they dominate K-State, then I think we actually have to go back to that discussion about whether the head-to-head matters. Because then, if you look back and forth, it's so even.
Right.
But if they struggle against K-State and TCU blows out Iowa State, then I think that's end of discussion. I think TCU passes the eye test at that point.
Okay. We've talked about number 2 Oregon versus number 7 Arizona. Is there any chance at all that number 16 Missouri can beat number 1 Alabama in the SEC title game?
Funny stat, right? This is how
little. You're telling me yes. Okay.
This is how little the committee. No, there's no chance because this is how little the committee thinks. They have Missouri ranked at number 16.
Correct.
Ahead of them is number 15 UCLA, who got blown out by Stanford last week.
Right.
And number 14 Georgia, who they beat outright to win the SEC East.
Whoops. Okay. Yes, or maybe not.
No. I was with everybody else kind of hoping that something would happen so that Georgia ended up in this game because I wanted to see something that would be, have the potential to have some real competition here because I still believe Georgia is a very good football team. But that just didn't happen. Missouri finished the season the way they needed to, and, the Big Ten is 1-0 against the SEC. Indiana has a win over the SEC East.
And that's just a spectacular
I
thing.
as good as the SEC West is, the SEC East is just baffling. It's just there's just no rhyme or reason to it, and it came down to those two teams. And Missouri did the job, and credit to them. They had to win that game at home. They did, happy for them. But I don't see this being exceptionally an entertaining game. But hey, who knew Alabama had the capability to put up Oregon-like offensive numbers against Auburn?
Sure.
I watched that entire game in the hotel, and because that's the game that they were doing for Talkback this week. So I was actually submitting questions to Gene Stallings, which was kind of fun. And 3 of my questions got answered on the air, so that was cool.
Okay, very nice.
But so
you're a ringer, though.
What was that?
You're a ringer.
I was a ringer, but I didn't use my real name, so it's okay. That's what we do on the interwebs. But anyhow, so I was watching that game pretty intently, and to watch those two teams go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and put up those kinds of offensive numbers, I honestly didn't know that Blake Sims and the Alabama offense had that in them. And so seeing that this week, if nothing else, it secures me in knowing that I think the committee is spot on with having them at number 1.
Okay.
But no, sorry, Missouri. This is not. No, Alabama wins. They're in.
Okay. Guys, that is our top 10. And those are our championship games and our championship and a half games for the Big 12 or whatever it is we're going to call them. It's the fun starts actually on Friday night out on the West Coast and continues through Saturday. It should be an awesome weekend. And if the championship games aren't good enough for you, next week we bring back Bowlapalooza, and as we did last season, we will be joined by Braden Gall, David Fox of Athlon Sports, and SiriusXM, and all of that good stuff. I believe our format's going to be the same. We're each going to pick a bowl game and pick it apart and give you guys a little insight, or in my case, perhaps just a little entertainment. What's coming
it's all entertainment. Come on.
What's coming up for bowl season?
Yeah. All the crazy bowl games that are out there. No, we're excited to have them back on. It's gonna be a good time. I don't even know who's playing in bowl games, and I've already picked my game. So
okay.
Yeah. I didn't care who's playing in it. I picked the game already. So so that shows you where my head is in this game.
Okay.
So, yeah, no, it's gonna be a good time having them on, and then maybe we'll actually do a real show maybe for the playoff. Who knows?
Yeah, we'll do something like that.
Real shows are overrated.
Yeah. Guys, enjoy Championship Week. I hope you enjoyed the show, and please do come back next week for Bowlapalooza. It should be a good time. Carla, thank you.
Thank you as always.
We will see you guys next week.